One of the most shocking findings of my work was the idea that the most compassionate people I have interviewed over the last 13 years were also the absolutely most boundaried. Because
most boundaried.
So I'll give you a great definition of the definition of boundary that I use in the book. Boundary is simply what's okay and what's not okay. What I think we do is we don't set boundaries. We let people do things that are not okay or get away with behaviors that are not okay. Then we're just resentful and hateful. Me, I'd rather be loving and generous and very straightforward with what's okay and what's not okay. And I learned from the research. I was the exact opposite. I assumed for the first 35 years of my life that people were sucking on purpose just to piss me off. That's what I assumed. Yeah, right. Whether it was someone who worked for me or it was family member who was constantly I was always critical and judgy. And I was like, why are they choosing these things? Why are they making their choices? They should know better. And then when this thing came up from my therapist, what if people are doing the best they can? I thought, my husband had the most beautiful answer to that question. He said, I'll never know whether people are doing the best they can or not. But when I assume people are, it makes my life better. So now I think I am not as sweet as I used to be, but I'm far more loving.
It's not just some technique so that you can do that. That's really a way of being to nurture that soil of wholeheartedness.
Yeah. Generosity, to assume the best about people, is almost an inherently selfish act, because the life you change first is your own.
You love yourself.
Yeah. And so my question is big, B-I-G. Mm-hmm. What boundaries need to be in place for me to stay in my integrity and make the most generous assumptions about you? But generosity can't exist without boundaries, and we are not comfortable setting boundaries because we care more about what people will think, and we don't want to disappoint anyone. We want everyone to like us, and boundaries are not easy. But I think they're the key to self-love, and I think they're the key to treating others with loving kindness. Sustaining. Nothing is sustainable without boundaries. I think compassion and empathy are different things. And again, I'm relying on my data for this. I think compassion is a deeply held belief that we're inextricably connected to each other by something rooted in love and goodness. I call that God. Not everybody calls that God. My dad would call it fishing. Fishing?
Is it fishing?
No, there's no G in fishing.
Okay.
But I think compassion is a deeply held belief. I think empathy is the skill set to bring compassion alive. So empathy is something we can teach. I mean, it's something we've taught our kids since they were very little. It's about how to communicate that deep love for people in a way so that people don't know they're not alone. I think there's a lot of new interesting information out there about empathy not being a good thing, about that, there's an argument that says, if Travis is in struggle and I practice empathy with you, I'm taking on your darkness, and it leads to burnout, and but empathy is not feeling for somebody. It's feeling with them. It's touching a place in me that knows where you've been, so I can look at you and say, me too, brother. You're not alone in this. And I find empathy to be infinite. I think it gives back tenfold what you put out.
It's sustaining. If you've done the work and you have your boundaries,
mm-hmm.
I mean, you could tread that water forever and never get tired.
Okay, so empathy. I'm quoting Travis here. Empathy. If you've done your work and set your boundaries, you can tread that water forever. Yeah. Amen. It's not finite. And it keeps giving back to us. And so this idea that, but here we go back to where we started this conversation. Empathy minus boundaries is not empathy. Compassion minus boundaries is not genuine. Vulnerability without boundaries is not vulnerability. So you see that there's a huge riff here, which is boundaries are freaking important.
Right.
And it's not, they're not fake walls. They're not separation. Boundaries are not division. They're respect. Here's what's okay for me and here's what's not.